Well, hey guys, welcome to a special edition of Rubbing Elbows with the Pastors, except today we're going to rub elbows with a chaplain. So this is Merle Myers, a chaplain with a bunch of different organizations. I'll let you give him the rundown. Also happens to be my father. So he was in town for Father's Day, and I said, hey, strap on a mic, let's help some people. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to talk about grief and loss and suffering, companioning and things like that. And just starting from the basic realization that there really is no way to avoid loss and suffering for your whole life, and there's no way, I'm going to butcher the Helen Keller quote, but there's no way around it. You have to go through it.
Yep.
And that's in a lot of ways a community project. And so I want to get into, how we can respond to people that are in needs, what we should do when we've got these needs, and so on. But why don't you just tell folks a little bit about what it is that you do exactly as a chaplain, and then how you got started with it.
Okay, with a chaplaincy, you represent an agency. That could be a secular agency, that could be a church, religious agency, and you go and do their mission for them. That could be visiting people in a hospital, it could be first responder chaplaincy, that kind of thing. So we're protected by federal law to do some things that pastors can't go, because they're tasked primarily to promote the gospel, and chaplains are just to represent their organization, and they're all over many different functions.
Yeah, it's interesting. As a pastor, sometimes my title gets me in places, like, at the hospital right now during the COVID thing, it's like, the hospitals can't have visitors, the patients, I mean, and I can go in there and be like, hey, I'm his pastor, and they're like,
yep,
right this way.
Yeah.
So I can get in there. There are other places where the title keeps me out. We wanted to help with a suicide prevention program. Yeah, and they the kind of municipal agency said no, because you're gonna proselytize, and I'm like, I've got news of hope, and so you're not letting me in? Like, that's the plan here? I was infuriated,
And they use the separation of church and state card, basically. Right. Yeah.
So in your position, then you can kind of occupy this middle ground that sometimes I wouldn't be welcomed into, right? So then you carry out their mission for them. You work with for hospitals and stuff like that, and going to do what, grief and trauma, loss. You're running groups. I mean, what does the actual work look like?
It's one-on-one, primarily groups though. And your mom and I each facilitate our own groups, or we'll co-facilitate with each other, like we did here 2 years ago, or with other folks. So, yeah, it's just a matter of meeting people where they're at. It could have been a job loss, it could have been a death of a loved one, a betrayal, like David in Psalm 6:6. And it's just meeting people where they're at. And, pastors do a great job as well, just listening. And that's key in the whole process.
Sometimes we do a great job listening.
Yeah. So that's kind of the whole gambit of what we do, just and being there.
There's another side of it, which is Camp Aaron. Tell them what that's about.
Yeah, so Camp Aaron, when your mom and I first joined hospice, that was on the end of life side. And then they said, you got to try Camp Aaron, always recruiting, good for them. So Camp Aaron is bereavement camp for 6 to 18-year-olds, and it's during the summer. And anybody that's lost a loved one, they can come together. There's a lot of grief activities, and there's a lot of play. They do, the thing that really sold me on it was I was a big buddy there, had, I think, 9s, 10s, and 11s in my cabin. And they did an activity called the Grief Walk. And that's going up a path, and then there's banners, and then the facilitator, she's a social worker, she stops, and the banner will say shock and disbelief, and she'll say, you just heard the news that your mother was killed in a car accident. You can't believe it. And then Cynthia, she knows the cases of every child there.
Whoa.
And she's got a drama background. So, I mean, big people get rattled,
right.
Just going along. A fantastic, gifted woman. So then she explains, how your brain is releasing chemicals to protect you from the full-on shock. That's why you're numb. That's why you don't believe it. And so she makes things real. And then you go up the hill again. Another is anger. There's a void in your heart that your loved one has left. Sometimes that gets filled with anger. Sometimes just a lot of sadness. and this is normal. So a lot of validating and normalizing, and that's the business basically.
That's a big deal because you feel like you're crazy. You know,
Yeah.
grief changes the way that you think. It changes
does.
your decision-making process, and you know you can feel like you're completely out of control. But I stole this from him one time. I've called up Dad before and said, "Hey, here's the situation I'm dealing with pastorally. You know, these are the questions I got. What do you think?" And he'll kind of, you know, give me some standard best practices in the grief world, and then I'll walk back into the room like I know what I'm doing. So there you go. I just tipped my hand to you guys, and but that was one of the things that you told me was, yeah, this is normal and expected. And
Yeah.
I'm like, that is a great phrase, and so that's really carried us through a lot.
Well, thank you. I can't take credit for that because when I get the call from him, then I sneak off and make a call to my people. So he gets a third hand, but it's good information anyway.
Right. So then, just talking about how stuff changes internally with somebody when they're in grief. Actually, you brought this mask here. Why don't you explain what this is and just kind of what's going on in somebody's head?
What can I do the grief walk thing? Okay, so
Oh,
you
sorry,
get no, that's all right. Don't ever do that again.
Yes, sir.
You get to the top of the hill, and then the banners have more positives, like remembering. You know, your loved one isn't going to be like a pallet kicked off the back of a truck and you drive off. You're taking their memory with you.
Okay.
And it's your memory, whatever it is you remember about your loved one. And you can go on and you can take that legacy with you in your life, of their life.
Yep.
So, you know, there's hope. And then at the very last banner, it's acceptance. You know, and so it's fantastic. It can be very traumatic though to some of these children. I had one young man in my cabin. His father had suicided, and he was just distraught. And I want to go home, call my mom, and okay, we can call your mom, but the heavy lifting is over. You know, you have your friends here. We got a great lunch. What do you want to do? Okay, I'll stay. And he stayed, glad he did. But that night in the cabin, it was about 2 a.m, and he was sleeping, but he was processing.
This is after the grief walk?
Yeah,
Okay.
2 a.m.
Yeah.
And he was crying. It wasn't a panic attack in his sleep, but it was like getting there. And he's saying, "No, Daddy, don't go, don't go." And I was just saying, what have we done to these kids?
Yeah.
You know, should I go get the counselor? And I just sat there. And he was whimpering and crying and pleading with his dad. And then about 10 minutes later, he calmly, in his sleep, he said, "Goodbye, Dad." So he processed it, and that was a hanky alert for me.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But
It's a long 10 minutes too.
it was an eternity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this works, and then the children process it, and then this is Providence Hospice Bereavement, this particular organization. We work with the families, the counselors one-on-one, and then we have monthly group activities where the families come together, and they're all with people that have significant life losses.
Yep.
It's not like they go to school and people kind of put them off because they don't understand
Sure.
or don't want to say the wrong thing. So yeah, so in Camp Aaron, we have activities, and I was supposed to run this activity this year, and this is the masks. And this is a teen group, a girl, and
Maybe I'll just kind of do a zoom in here.
yeah. We'll tell the kids, draw on the outside how people see you, and then they happy, bold, whatever the words are, joyful, and then we'll get done with that, and then we'll share, and then after that we'll say, draw how you feel on the inside. And that's where you get the emotional pain that they actually bring out, and they share with each other. And again, it's validating and normalizing.
Yeah.
You're not going crazy. This is perfectly normal. And grief and trauma, they're a natural distress. They're not a disorder. They've gotten wise in psychiatry now, I believe. They've dropped the D for disorder on PTSD because it's a natural distress. Because you were in a combat zone, you saw your mom get abused, or you were abused. So that's a normal and natural distress. So it's handled that way. Also, one more is This works for big people too. And this was at the International Survivor Day that your mom and I co-facilitated last year in Linwood.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a crack on this one. So
Yeah. So what do you think that represents?
This person
from the outside.
Yeah, this person is maybe seen as broken in some sense, but still strong and calm and honest and blunt and whatever.
Yeah.
So people see me as having survived or something.
There you go. Yeah. And then how about the inside?
So the inside here, there's more cracks, and all of the adjectives are kind of conclusive, right? Depressed, bitter, fractured.
Yeah.
And then, okay, healing but permanently damaged. So there's a qualifier, healing but.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then the tears in the eyes there.
And so much of this bringing this out is a matter of integrating the pain into your life, because the death of a loved one, whether it's suicide or natural causes where you were at the bedside, you were part of the story, you were able to say goodbye, that's still very hard. But that tends to eclipse your life. Their death eclipses your life. So we integrate the loss with the good memories, and it builds a mosaic.
Okay, so let me contrast two ways of dealing with the pain in the world, and then we'll kick this around and see what's right and what's wrong here. You've got on one hand kind of an Eastern, we'll call it a New Age Buddhist approach, right, where the goal is to escape it.
Yeah.
Or to maybe deny it or something like that.
Avoid.
There you
Yeah.
go. Pretend. I don't know. On the other side, you've got the book of Job when his friends were doing it right. Okay.
Yeah.
So with the avoiding side of things, I'll just give you my reflection, and you can shape this or tell me I'm totally wrong. It's okay. I've always seen that as kind of actually dehumanizing, because something about grief and pain actually serves a function in the human experience. You know, we're not machines that just put out a certain product with a certain stimulus or input, right? And so we're supposed to interact with the world as it actually is. And if we spend all of our time trying to transcend, the suffering, then we're missing out on something that actually makes us human. And I don't know the best way to explain that, but there's something about it where it's like, that's really tragic when somebody finds it to be a virtue to not deal with the darkest stuff in life, right?
Yeah.
And then on the other side, with Job's friends, and we'll get into the story there probably, I'm sure, but they showed up and they sat with him and they did what you call companioning, and that was something that was seen as virtuous. And so instead of transcending or avoiding, they dove into the suffering head first, even when it wasn't theirs. They kind of took it on themselves, not vicariously, but in partnership with Job.
Yeah, and that brilliantly said. And then
well, thank you.
in the Buddhist terminology, that's called dukkha. Life is pain. Life is dukkha. So we have avoid, and then the opposite is approach. And Job's friends, you said they jumped in there willingly. They did. But Job invited them to join him in his frame of reference.
Okay.
Join me in my horror. He lost his children. He lost his cattle.
Yeah, I should give a rundown. If you're not familiar with the book of
it.
Job, basically the story goes like this. This guy was on top of the world. I actually read an interesting theory recently that he was the fourth king of Moab that's mentioned in whatever. So he was a king or a prominent figure.
I was there. It's a fact.
He was So
oldest book in the Bible.
No, you're my younger brother. Just look at him.
Yeah.
But they say he was the fourth king whose name was Jobab, I guess. I don't know. It could be right. So he was a prominent figure. Had all this cattle, which was wealth at the time. He had land. He had 10 kids. He had, a wife. And then everything except for his wife got taken from him in one day. His cattle got burned and destroyed and stolen and whatever. His kids all died. Like 10 kids, adult children apparently, died. And the only thing that was left was his wife, who told him, hey, God is basically, I don't know what you did to make him mad, but he's not helping you out here. So curse God and die. Take the easy way out. Which, ladies, if your husband is ever suffering, don't say that to him. Why don't you just curse God and die? Not a good wife move.
And she was traumatized as well.
You bet. Lost 10 kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
Still, don't say that.
Yeah.
And then he got sick. He busted out with boils and all sorts of stuff. Just painful stuff. And it turns out that behind the scenes, God was letting Satan wail on him to show, essentially what faithfulness actually looks like. And And there was this whole meta narrative playing out in the spiritual realm, but Job never got to see it. He just saw what was right in front of his face. So he's suffering. He's got 3 friends that come in, and they sit with him for how many days?
7.
There it is, 7 days and 7 nights. And, yeah, we looked that up. So they sit with him for 7 days and 7 nights, and they didn't say anything. They companioned with him. They entered into, they approached his suffering. And then they started talking, and they started lecturing, and they started trying to analyze and tell him.
Judge.
Yeah, they judged. They said, well, here's what you did to upset God, and here's why he's taken out all this retribution on you. And then God got mad at them, and he said, if Job doesn't pray for you, I'm going to kill you because you have not spoken of me what is right. Interestingly, a lot of what they said about God was correct. They've got this beautiful poetry. They got all this majestic praise of God, and most of what they said factually is true, but that's not the way the truth was meant to be used. And so they were held responsible for using a correct statement in an incorrect way to hurt somebody, and it wound up having the same effect as a lie. So companioning versus, I don't know, what would you call that, fixing?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So that's the story of Job, essentially.
Yeah, and the 3 friends, the silence obviously it killed them. It was just deafening. So they had to do their little input, their little fixing. Well, we see that today.
Sure.
I'm sorry for your loss. Heaven's now a better place that they're there.
Yeah, God needed another angel.
Yeah. All things work together for good. A lot of it's true, but a lot of these scriptures are kind of bend to fit to make people feel better.
Yeah, and Romans 8:28 is a beautiful scripture, right? God works all things together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Don't say that at a wake.
Yeah.
That's it basically has the same effect as, hey, turn your frown upside down. It's going to be all right. Think
Yep.
positive,
Yeah. And there's going to be a lot of awkward silence. You just honor it, because a lot of times they're going to ask questions. Why? Why did this happen? Why did God, allow this? I don't know. Sometimes they don't even want an answer. They just want to be able to ask the question, because we got to bring curiosity and humility with us whenever we do this, because they certainly have curiosity and humility.
I find that sometimes they do want an answer in the moment, but when they get it, they don't remember what it is later because they're mid-process and they got so much going on. And so it's like, it was kind of they wanted an answer, but I need to know when it's actually not time to provide one, right? Because they're not going to know that. They got a lot going on, right?
Yeah.
So we need to know as the companions.
Yeah, and you can't break it with silence. It's impossible. With trauma, Dustin, you started off with everything Job went through. And in the book of Job, it has a lot of effects of trauma that he went through. And I'm going to try not to defer to my list here. He had, you pierced my bones. So he had aching bones and joints. And that's with a lot of trauma people. And even those in the throes of grief, they can't get out of bed in the morning. Their joints ache. Depression, I wish that I had not have been born. Job suffered depression
Despair
at that time.
and all of that.
Yeah, and you send hollowed eyes. His friends didn't even recognize him. The hollowed eyes.
Oh wow, I missed that one.
The 1,000-yard stare.
Yeah.
And then he said, "You send me visions by day and nightmares at night." And people will have looping flashbacks of the death scene. The death scene could have just been a second or a fraction of a second, a gunshot. But then when it's looping over and over for days and weeks, it's hundreds times worse than it was for the victim.
You re-traumatized over and over again.
And then they become nightmares at night. They loop, and you can get stuck. And about 20% of traumatized people do get stuck.
Wow.
But there's natural, normal ways to bring them out of it and reframe that part of their life.
Yeah, and in the end, I mean, it's not even in the end of the book of Job, but he winds up saying, and I've always thought of this as the centerpiece of the book of Job, really, is in chapter 9, he makes this kind of, it's not even a comment, it's like a wish. He says, I wish that there was somebody that could occupy the space between me and God, because I feel so far away from him. I just don't know why this is happening. And he says, why can't there be a mediator between us that puts one hand on God and one hand on me and can connect us? Now, from a New Testament perspective, as Christians, we're like, we got that guy, right? That's Jesus. He's fully God. He's fully man. He entered into our suffering and took it on himself. And then he speaks authoritatively as God, and yet he's totally silent in the middle of his suffering a lot of times.
Yeah.
Like he fills all of those gaps. Now, Job, being the oldest book in the Bible, he didn't have all of that perspective. But the interesting thing is he asks for it, and he says, I want God to fix this, but he doesn't ask until chapter 9.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because as a pastor, maybe not even because I'm a pastor, maybe I'm just a fundamentalist Bible thumper. I want to run in and be like, the Bible speaks to this. Boom, 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 boom. Mm-hmm. He didn't ask until chapter 9. It wouldn't have helped him, right?
That's right. Yeah, great observation. And then you go to chapter 42. You've heard the angry atheist. Why did God put Job and his family through this just on a wager, you know? And then they leave it hanging.
Right.
Well, here's the deal. In 42, Job sums everything up. Before the suffering, my ear heard of you. I knew about God. God was a righteous God, great provider. He gave me everything.
Yep.
And then he says, but after the suffering, my eye sees you. So he becomes a present
My
reality.
ear heard of you versus my eye sees you.
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis said that. He said, God whispers to us in our comfort, but he screams to us in our pain.
Yeah.
And we get a better, a closer communication with, or more clear communication with him, because your senses get heightened at times during grief, just as they get dulled at times, and that whole spectrum. There's a function for that in the human existence, and God is not absent from it. But it's interesting because when people are going through some suffering as Christians, they're like, I'm going to go read Job. And I almost have this reaction like, maybe you should wait a while.
Yeah.
Because the interesting thing about Job is he never gets an answer as to why this is happening, apparently.
Yeah. But millions and millions of people have since then.
Yeah, but it's not a conclusive answer. It's more of a companioning answer, right? Mm-hmm. So like I heard it said once that, in Job, Job is not really about suffering. It's about how you see God in the middle of suffering. And so it's kind of on that higher level. And so if you go there looking for a conclusive sentence that can explain your situation, you're probably not going to find it. But what you find instead is a more of a worldview shaping type of reflection. And it seems like that's almost part of it is, that dialogue of the why and the how and all that process and the stuff that he goes through. That's just as much the point, maybe more, than any answer you're going to get.
It's about the journey.
And the companioning.
Yeah, and we're made to go through suffering, and we're made to heal.
We're made to heal. Explain that.
We don't have to have a bandage on our arm when we have a cut for the rest of our lives, because we heal.
So you're saying the same thing happens internally?
Yeah, emotionally. Yeah, and it's been said the distance between success and failure is 14 inches. The distance from the head versus the heart where the grief resides. And that's where you have to address and process. The intellectual and the spiritual, the person will bring that in their own good time. But what are we going to do with the pain and the emptiness?
Yeah. So when you're a chaplain, then you've got a different approach to spiritual matters, because you're not going to shy away from the gospel, but you've kind of got a methodology that you've got to go with where they bring it up first or something, right? Whereas when I walk into a room, I'm the Jesus guy. We all know where this is going, but with you're bringing comfort and help and helping people process in a lot of situations, regardless of what they believe. Because atheists typically don't turn to me. They might intersect with somebody like you. So what are some guiding principles, or just as far as when to bring the spiritual side of things into these conversations? And I'm asking this because a lot of our people are going to be walking with folks in their family or their circle of influence that don't believe like us. They don't have the same beliefs about what happens after we die and all of that. Mm-hmm. And they still want to help them. So what are some principles as far as how to go about that?
Like you and I both believe in the holistic approach. And the holistic approach isn't an Eastern mysticism thing. It has to do with the body. So for the body, you get a physician. For the mind or the emotions, you can get a counselor, a therapist, And for spiritual, you can get a clergy or a spiritual community. So you have all of these set, then you can be whole or holistic. And it's not W-H-O-L-E, it's H-O-L, like holy, hagios, to be set apart.
The image of God is more than just Bible knowledge, right? It's mind, body, spirit, all of those things.
Yeah, and you can access that through Scripture and good teaching, of course, which people get in this church. But it is that kind of approach. So you have to be separated from something and then separated to something, and that the spiritual community is a big part of that too. It can be people within the church that the pastor doesn't have to be the companion. There can be focals, one point of contact that can make sure that people are sent to the right groups or the right services in the community.
Yeah, and the pastors shouldn't be everybody's companion, because they should have close relationships with other people. And also, like, if it's a lady, you know, like let's say it's a lady that's my age, I'm not going to go and be her go-to, right? That's not healthy. There's all sorts of problems that go with that. So the whole body of Christ comes into play, you know, in this situation. So.
Yeah. So as a chaplain, I can go ahead and refer people to a spiritual community. You know, it can be a church with great teaching and great groups. Like there's one that I'm going to refer somebody to. They've got a group. It's called Betrayal and Beyond. And a lot of betrayal in this person's life. A wonderful person and suffered a lot of pain. You can get that in a spiritual setting, biblically based setting, whether you're a believer or unbeliever. You know, all the stuff like the dukkha and the, you know, avoiding the pain and everything, all of that is non-biblical. Everything that works, like Job's friends, starting off right, you know, all the good principles used by believers and unbelievers are in the Bible.
Yeah,
So,
it's like God made us, and He explained us really well.
Yeah,
you know? So,
yeah, the owner's manual.
Yeah, there you go. I heard a thing. It's not a great summary totally, but helpful at times. You know, BIBLE is basic instructions before leaving Earth.
Oh yeah.
And one of them is sit with your friends that are hurting and shut up for a while. Like, it's okay.
Yep.
So how do people know then when it's time to start talking? Because you don't want to stay silent forever, right? At some point, we have comfort. So I told you this story when we were driving here, right? I heard I guess you could call him a pastor. He called himself a pastor. We'll go with that. Yeah. So he was a pastor giving a little sermonette deal on, you know, grief, and he said, when I'm hurting, I don't want somebody to share some kind of good news with me. I just want to know that they care. And I'm like, you just told me you don't want the gospel? Like, you're a Christian, you know? And I'm thinking, like, the Holy Spirit's title is the Comforter, or at least one of his titles, you know?
Yeah.
And so at some point, we should be ready to extend that to people. What are some guiding principles about where we've crossed the line where it's okay to start talking?
I think a lot of that you're going to kind of feel from them.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's kind of a positive response, a lot of times I'll just summarize back in just a little different language than they explain something. Oh, so what you're telling me is, yeah, and then you can have open-ended follow-up questions to keep bringing that pain out, and then, you know, you can again validate what they said.
So when you start talking, it's in an effort to get them talking more. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so it's not stuffed down in here and, you know, festers and resurrects in a form that you're not going to understand. You're processing it.
You ever have that moment where you say almost nothing and they walk out like, you just helped me so much with everything you just told me, and you're like, I didn't tell you anything, you did all of that.
Yeah, I was at the Virginia Mason. It's psychological trauma there. Dr. R and Laura T. They're some of the best in the world at this. They had some homicide witnesses walk out, and they were there for guidance, and they said, I feel so much better. I just can't believe this. And then after they left, said their goodbyes with the therapist, she goes, I didn't say a word, you know? And that's how this works. That's the beauty of it, you know? So.
Yeah, if it was always so simple. I think maybe also the most helpful thing that people can do is get themselves a support animal.
Oh, absolutely.
So, this is our support dog, our Irish support dog, Doniker.
Yep.
And he's always ready to give somebody a good licking. So.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a weird thing. Like, support animals have become a real thing in the last, I don't know what, 10 years or something. Is
Yeah.
this actually, is it helpful, or is it just some kind of new wave gimmick that it's like?
No, it's very comforting,
Yeah.
and they can sense when you're stressing out. It doesn't have to be the kind of support animal that's gone through the $30,000 training. I
Right,
mean, they're kind of natural that way. Anyhow, you don't want cats because they'll jump on your lap when you're getting ready to die. If you've heard those stories,
Yep.
dogs are where it's at.
Yeah.
So you want the dogs.
I've been there for those stories too.
Yeah.
Every time you touch this person, it's excruciating pain.
Yeah.
Your body's shutting down, and here comes the cat. Like,
That's right. Yeah, but you look what's going on in Seattle and the big cities where they've got, in some areas with young married couples, they've got more pets than kids, more dogs than kids. Because first, you don't have to put out the emotional risk, the vulnerability of being rejected after 18 years of pouring your heart out to a child. They could just say, heck with you, I'm going to do my own thing. A dog's not going to do that. So you get a payoff for petting the dog or having the dog put his face on your lap.
Sure.
So
waiting for you when you come home, that kind of thing.
Yeah, letting him out of the trunk. He's not going to yell at you like others.
And report you and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
So no, there's payoff for having puppy dogs.
Yeah. So if
and they're at Camp Aaron too.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's also not the I mean, dogs are not children, right? Here's the thing though. A lot of times, I think we will transfer our emotional needs to our kids because they make us feel better. Because having your kids around is a good thing. We love our kids, right? And sometimes if we lean on our kids too much for emotional well-being, like, hey, come here and sit with daddy, you're making me feel better or whatever, that's a really unhealthy load to put on them. And so I think you can kind of zoom out and see that as a microcosm for what we do a lot of times is we call people in when we're suffering to make us feel better without realizing that this may be causing secondary trauma to them in some way, And so as people in the church, it's like we should be ready to be those people that are called in so that we're ready to not be traumatized and not carry the weight of what they're, what they're carrying, so that it starts messing with our ability to sleep and process and all that kind of stuff.
And that leads to cutting with young people, usually girls. They're the go-to people. They've got more wisdom than anyone else their age in that setting. And so people come and just unload.
Yeah. Middle school and high school especially. I mean, people reach out to their friends. They go to their friends before parents, before counselors, certainly before pastors, And so the friends end up carrying a lot of each other's emotional burdens. Yeah.
In the church, the pastor's the person that's most likely going to be approached, and that's a good thing. There was something else. The study, we've talked about this before, in 2000 in Israel, they had 350,000 Holocaust survivors, and they were getting re-traumatized, and their adult children were getting secondarily traumatized, and grandchildren. They didn't know what was going on, and they figured out, Dr. Nathan Kellerman did a study, and when they got out of the concentration camps, the death camps, they went back home and they went to work. They got jobs, they got married, life went on, and they kind of put the horrors in the background. As they retired, their spouses died off. They no longer had their support network, were becoming isolated. All the horrors and the depression and the trauma came back.
Really? Now, was that incremental, or was it kind of a flood? Or just case by case basis? How does that work?
It was incremental. Or no, I'm sorry, it was a flood. It was a flood, because you're still hearing from Holocaust survivors about being locked down with coronavirus.
Oh.
That's kind of coming back. You have isolation, you have distress. Both of them on their own are terrible. You put them together.
Wow.
That's
huge.
a
cocktail.
But they found, they found that just trusted listeners that listened to their story over and over and over again is what helped them, because they weren't there to fix it. They were just Job's friends the first 7 days and 7 nights. And then they found that the death camp survivors, their story would go farther back to when they were in university, when they were growing up.
You mean like upon the multiple retellings, they would go further back with each one?
And it would reframe. The horror was reframed into the life. The horror was here and within the life.
So it's almost like, to go back to what you said, we're made to heal.
Yeah.
But it takes certain ingredients to be able to do that, and one of them is a trusted listener.
Yeah.
companion.
Not try to fix it. Yeah. You know, it's been said that Noah's Ark was built by amateurs and the Titanic was built by professionals. So you don't have to. There's more where that came from.
That's going to make it into a sermon.
Yeah. Okay.
Soon.
All right. Yeah. So the professionals fail. A friend of mine, his adult daughter had suicided, taken her life. She had an IQ of like 162. She had a Harvard psychiatrist, and the Harvard psychiatrist is feeling pretty good about it. The girl figured out how she was and when she was going to take her life. So there was a calmness. The psychiatrist thought, hey, I'm pretty good at this stuff. And then at the end, after the death of the young girl, a young woman, the psychiatrist said she had me fooled.
Whoa.
You know, and you know, counselors, psychiatrists, they're in a different realm than the companion.
Yep.
But you can be a companion, and you can have the success. And it's a long process that can take months, years. And you know, people I work with, the agencies that allow me to communicate by phone with my number, they can call me anytime. I'll be available for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you got a text from one of your guys while you were on the way here.
Gosh, yeah. For Father's Day.
Yeah.
Oh, that was wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause he had lost his son or something, right?
Yeah, it was a suicide, and it was almost catatonic where he couldn't talk about it. You know, now it's little by little, little rays of light just pop more and more, and
Yep, so that little tiny text was a big deal.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
And even though it's a death with a shock that, of course, like we said, we don't have a part in the death. It's also, I've never seen one where it was out of selfishness. It was always out of pain. They're so good at masking pain that a spouse isn't even going to know many times. And so just being able to get that information and to put that in the right file in the brain, you know, you don't have to blame yourself. You know, you don't have to know why, or you know, I should have, well, you know, the hindsight guilt. You know, but that has to be processed. That's not wrong. And we don't say, don't feel guilty, because I'm not you. I don't know how you should feel.
Right.
But if there is guilt, let's talk about it. Let's process it, because that's going to be just like the horror story in the death camp.
Well,
that guilt is going to change, and it's going to, you know,
it's going to find its place in the whole. Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, I was dealing with one situation, and it was a suicide, and somebody actually said something like, you know, this would be a better place without you, or something. The person goes off and kills themselves, and they felt guilty. Now, what am I going to tell them in that moment? Oh, you had nothing to do with this. I mean, it was, they didn't pull the trigger, right? It wasn't their fault in the end. It wasn't their decision, but there was a participation there. And so I could lie to them and say, you know, hey, this has nothing to do with you, or we could categorize and help process properly, and, you know, let people take the information as it is. And one is based in reality, and the other's not. But yeah, you got to apply that with some love and some compassion and skill and timing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it doesn't have to be done in one session. I should have said this. They said this. Why didn't I say that? You know, that's out the door. You know, so many times on the end of life side at hospice, you expect someone's going to die with the last visit that you have with them. So you know, we talk a lot about with everybody. Just act as if that's going to be the last time you're going to see them, because you know something could happen. You know, so there's always arguments in the heat of the moment, married couples, friends, and then something tragically happens. You know, but that wasn't an intent for them to go. It was just another heated argument.
Yeah, you bet.
You know,
normal part of life, really.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So then, from a Christian perspective, we see suffering not just as a part of life, and actually, I hate to say it this way, but a valuable part of life, you know, which is not to say that we should enjoy it, but there is something, you know, something that Christians will lean into about suffering, because our example is Jesus, and he was the consummate sufferer, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting about that, because he suffered voluntarily. Like he didn't cause the problems that he came here to solve, and yet he jumped in and bore the brunt of it. So what lessons can we learn from watching Jesus engaged suffering in various ways. So sometimes he healed people and said, I'm going to take away your suffering right now. I'm going to raise your dead son, or I'm going to heal your mother-in-law, or whatever.
And then the spiritual. Then he works on the spiritual.
There you go, right. He uses that as an open door. So sometimes he fixes it, which we usually don't have the power to do. Sometimes he stays silent in the middle of it when he's on trial for his life. Sometimes he openly weeps in public because he's like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. Sometimes he yells and gets mad at people and says, hey, Jerusalem, like Matthew 23, right? I would have gathered you together under my wings as a hen gathers her chicks. You wouldn't do it. And he's lamenting, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes he just kind of sits and watches, right? So he's got all these different approaches. How does maybe this is too psychological with Jesus. I was going to say, how does he pick an approach? But how do we help people know what approach is right for them at that moment?
I think it was your second or third example, the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept.
Yep.
So he knew he was going to raise Lazarus in 10 minutes,
Yeah.
but he went and wept, because that was emotional. He lost a dear friend. Mm-hmm. He did not intend when there was creation, Jesus, the Yahweh of the Old Testament, did not intend for man to fall, and did not intend for death.
Yeah, this isn't how it's supposed to
Yeah.
be.
So he weeps, he expresses the emotion, and then he handled the spiritual. But they found Lazarus's tomb. He became bishop of Crete.
Did he?
900 AD, and the marker said Lazarus died twice, friend of Jesus.
Died twice. See, I always felt bad for him for that part.
So he tried to kill him again.
They did, yeah. They were like, we got to kill Lazarus.
I'm going
like,
to Crete, yeah.
That's your plan? Kill the dude that won't die?
Yeah.
Those Pharisees were losing it, man.
Oh, man.
Got a bunch of degrees around that table. And, all right, what do we do with this undead guy? Let's kill him.
Yeah.
So the apostles are like, you go hang out with Titus down there and fix those guys up.
Yeah.
Poor fella. Yeah, so I think the big takeaway there from watching Jesus engage suffering is don't shy away from it. Stick your hand up and volunteer. Jump in with somebody.
Exactly, and it was exhausting because he had to just go sleep and pray. By himself. But then Paul Breckel explained to me sometimes you want to be close when someone's grieving. Sometimes you want to be on the other side of the room, or like Jesus and the disciples, have them in the garden over there.
Yep.
So you kind of learn the space and how to hold their space while they're going through that. Just
that's
being
a big
there.
point.
Yeah, just being there.
Yeah, because then it's possible to smother people also.
Yeah. Because you're testifying to their pain, and so that's making it real.
Now that you say that, I think of a few times where I've been called into a family situation where somebody's dying and the whole family's there or whatever, and they're in the bedroom and I'm out in the living room sitting and talking to somebody else or whatever.
Yeah.
And they still appreciate just as much the fact that I was just there, even though I wasn't in their grill the whole time. Let family be family, but I'm still here for you, maybe in the next room, and there's times for that.
Yeah, and there's times for when the family's going to show up for a memorial service or a funeral, stop by with a case of bottled water.
Yeah.
Or some food or something. Just drop it and go. Just little things.
Because they're going to have people come in and, oh, I'm so sorry, and they're going to want to practice hospitality. You can just set them up for that.
Yep.
Yeah, great. Well, there was a quote that you read me about people being with people and suffering, and I think we were planning on bringing
Henri.
You want to close with that?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so this is a reflection. I read reflections in groups, and there's some wonderful ones out there. This is by Henri Nouwen. His first name's spelled Henri. So
Henry, yeah.
Henry,
yeah.
Henri.
Whatever.
Yeah, great.
He probably changed the pronunciation after he got a certain number of degrees.
That's right. But he's an author, Christian philosopher, and he has since passed away. He writes, when we honestly ask which persons in our lives mean the most to us, we often find that it is those who, instead of giving much advice, solutions, or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a gentle and tender hand. The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face with us the reality of our own powerlessness, makes it clear that whatever happens in this external world, being present to each other is what really matters. It's common sense.
Yeah.
Biblically based common sense.
Well articulated, biblically based common sense. God called it.
Moderately read, but
yeah. Well, you're that wasn't an audition for Audible.com.
Yeah,
I think you did great.
And I did go to Monroe, so that'd be top of the
class. It's a high accomplishment. That was not a public school reading. So. Well, guys, if you've got any questions about grief, loss, suffering, companioning, helping people, things like that, obviously we are here to to engage. If you've got questions for Dad, for Merle, sorry, we're professionals here.
Yeah.
If you got questions for,
I didn't know I was a father. Wow, thanks.
Made your day though,
yeah.
didn't I?
Yeah.
If you got questions for Merle, then you can forward them on, and I'll definitely, or you send them to me, and I'll forward them on for sure. And we'd be glad to help in any way that that we can. So
you can't harass us.
Yeah. So Doniker says goodbye.
Yep.
And we'll see you guys on the next Rubbing Elbows. All right, so we've got a question for the chaplain here. I've got a scenario for you, Chaplain Merle Myers. I'm at the hospital. I get called in because there was a guy that was dying. He basically drank himself to death and his organs were shutting down. And so one of my guys at church calls me up, says, "Hey, this family doesn't know a pastor. Can you get here and just help them through having to pull the plug?" I said, okay. So I go down there. There's a girlfriend. They've been living together, I bet, I guess about 7 years, and he's got 3 moms. He's got a bio mom that came back into the picture later, and then like 2 foster moms or something like that. So all the moms are over in the corner fighting for prominence, just basically devouring each other. The girlfriend says, "I'm his wife, so I get to make these decisions." And so they're all fighting for power on who gets to decide when to pull the plug.
And she's not the wife.
She's not the wife. She's the girlfriend.
Yeah.
And she says, I'm basically his wife. It's a common law thing or whatever. And so she pulls me out in the hallway, the girlfriend does, and says, "Hey, can you do our wedding ceremony right now? We were going to get married, at this date, whenever. Can you just do this wedding? You're a pastor. And then I'll be able to, help him die with some dignity or something." And I'm thinking, like, first off, there's nothing legal about this. You got to get a license, and there's a waiting period of like 4 days. And then even if you do marry the guy, if there was somehow a way to pull that off, you wouldn't want that at this point, because all of the bills and everything would just come straight to you. Like, what's the plan here? Of course, they weren't thinking straight, right? They were in a lot of grief, pain, turmoil. So I kind of talked her off the ledge. My time there, my effectiveness there sort of wrapped up for the day. He didn't pass. So I left. I get called the next day. I come back. They said, "Hey, it's time to pull the plug. Can you come back?" I said, "Sure." So I go back, and more family had shown up, and she's introducing herself as his wife. And I'm thinking, what just happened here, So I get the full story. Turns out the hospital chaplain from an unnamed hospital showed up after I left, performed the wedding ceremony between the girlfriend and the guy that was on life support, but he was obviously unconscious. So he had the guy's brother stand in and take the vows for him. Okay?
That's why the groomsmen always wear the same suits.
Right.
Just step up like Seinfeld says. Yeah.
Right, in case you gotta, do a little plug and play.
Next guy.
So my question is, I was ready to just find that chaplain and strangle him, because he had just done something so unethical and so wrong, but he was trying to bring comfort to people. And we find this a lot with bad chaplains. There are really good ones. I'm sitting next to one. But there are bad chaplains that just basically tell people whatever they want to hear in order to bring them momentary comfort. What should that chaplain have done when she called him and said, "Do our wedding ceremony"?
Well, as a Christian, I would not support this kind of paganism where, let's just fulfill their wishes and make them happy for 15 minutes. That's not doing the family a service at all. That's like going to nice church with comfortable seats and having the pastor tell you how nice you are. They're just telling you what you want to hear. That'd be the same thing, just supporting paganism, basically, the lifestyle, and without even giving the gospel. It sounds like a gospel message wasn't given. And you got to put boundaries in place. As a Christian, not just as a chaplain or a pastor, but we do have to have boundaries in place, because You go marrying people, you're kind of responsible for that spiritual relationship. It could end up in divorce or death, or it could be a successful marriage where, Christ is in the forefront. But, I wouldn't buy into a thing of the world like this. And, the pagan type thought process, they're doing, the best that they know how with the skills they have, and they have the skills they have because they have said no to God. Every morning when you get up, you're either going to say yes to God or you're going to say no. When you pray at the dinner table or any meal, you're inviting God to break bread with you, to have fellowship, and as well as thank Him for the food. But there has been no invitation, or it sounds like a gospel message at all. And if the guy was unconscious, I would have given him the gospel, because the hearing is the last thing to go. And people in comas come out, people die and come back, and they say, yeah, I heard what you said. So that was a waste of time for that chaplain, and he'll be accountable for that. I hope that, the chaplain learns and gets on the right path, on the God path.
Yeah. Well, he's got access to all the information, right? So we hope so. Yeah, so it's not about comfort at all costs, right? It's about comfort, and we can't compromise the truth to do it, because then we're not doing anybody any favors.
That's right. Comfort's great, but like A.W. Tozer said, God doesn't care about your comfort, He cares about your character. And, a lot of the suffering is character building, too, by design.
Very good.
And then there's suffering from evil, of course. That's a totally different category where we suffer from evil. So.
Yeah, well, my reaction to that whole scenario was basically blind, red-faced rage. So thank you for articulating what went wrong there.
Yeah, you're not responsible or accountable for his mistakes or his worldview, as skewed as it is. So he's going to have to stand up on that one.
Yeah, I do wish I had stuck around a little longer so that I could have been there when he showed up, but I don't know that I would have been able to do anything. So on to the next one, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Pastor.